"Go on home, old man. There is nothing down there that needs you." That is Dale, my oldest, with his shoulder against the newel post of a house I put up in 1983, set so I would have to move him to reach my own basement stairs. 12 minutes earlier, he had called me from down there. "Mr. Myers." The electrician kept his voice down. "Somebody framed 4 rooms in your basement, 4 doors on them. There are people behind the doors, and they are paying to be there." Dale hired him to price the panel. He called me instead, because the sheet in his hand had a line my son could not fill in. I came, and he did not move. Then he turned to the man with the meter and described me the way you might mention a ladder. "Somebody left standing in a hall. Don't get him started. He signs things. Then by the weekend, he'll swear he never saw the paper. Let me have that work order. I'll take care of it." I stood on a floor I nailed down myself and let him say the whole thing. A girl came up out of the stairwell with a laundry basket braced against her side and stopped at 3 men in the hall. She looked at my boots, then my face, and asked if I was the county man about the water. Dale answered before I got my mouth open. "He's nobody's sweetheart. He used to own the place." I let that stand where he put it, and went around him and down the stairs. The air was warm and smelled like drywall dust and somebody else's supper. 4 doors in a row where my workbench used to be. Hollow core, out of plumb, painted flat gray to match the blocks so your eye slid off them. On 3 of the 4, there was a barrel bolt fastened to the hallway side of the casing. A bolt mounted on that side of a door is not there to keep a person safe inside the room. It is there to keep the room shut. The one at the bottom of the stairs had been my wife's. Nell had that room for the last 4 months she was alive. We moved her down when the staircase got the better of her, and while the saw was still in my hand, she took 2 promises off me. One was that nothing in there would be moved. I opened it. A stud wall ran down the middle. Her bed was gone. A mattress on the floor, a crate turned over for a nightstand, a work jacket on the hook that held her robe. Where I cut a window through 10 inches of block, there was fresh drywall, the screw dimples still showing. My right hand went flat on the casing and jumped once, the way a hand does after 50 years of gripping things. Then it went still. The electrician had come down after me. He had the work order out, panel upgrade, 4 sub-meters on 4 circuits, and a blank line at the foot of it for whoever the property belongs to. He had the pen out too. I creased that sheet twice and slid it into my shirt pocket, and told him I would give it a look that evening. He walked out to his van, brought in a red tag, and fixed it to the service panel with my son watching. Dale came down 2 steps. "Dad, put your name on it. You're making a scene in front of a tradesman. I am 66. I have put a wife in the ground and footings in the February mud, and I know that whoever talks loudest is generally holding the least." So I kept my voice where it was and asked him a question instead. "Who feeds them, son?" He had nothing for that. His eyes went to the 2nd door, then the 3rd, and his face changed. "Dad." He had hold of my sleeve. "Leave it. The other 3 aren't." His palm came up over his own mouth. That is what a boy does when a number gets out of him in front of the wrong man. I looked at my son. He got those hands from his mother. That is why I have kept quiet 6 years while my place inside that house shrank every visit. The 2nd promise Nell took that afternoon was about him, and I have not broken it. She had nothing to say to me about doors he hung himself. I went up and sat in the truck with the ring open in my palm. 14 keys. I cut some of them before that boy could walk. A red tag is not advice. Nothing new goes on that panel until a licensed man signs it off, and my son had a 2nd water heater and 4 rented rooms on it with the summer to run. As far as he knew, the only trouble in his morning was an old man who would not hurry up with a pen. In a drawer in that kitchen, there is a file with a date typed on the tab, the 6th of August. My son had it in his head that he was 6 weeks and 1 signature from finished. He was 3 days out from it, and a report was coming that no licensed man is permitted to sit on. Before I take you down those stairs a 2nd time, and I am going to, because you need to see the 2nd door, do me one favor. If you have ever been talked about in the 3rd person while you were standing right there? Say so in the comments. My name is Theodore Myers. I am 66. I would like to know how many of us there are. I went back at 8 o'clock that night with a cordless drill. Dale's truck was gone. I knocked at the top of the stairs and said out loud that it was the owner of the house twice, and the television kept going in the front room and nobody came. I put the drill on the first bolt and backed it out, and then the second, and then the third. 14 screws. I put every one of them in my trouser pocket, and I could feel them there for the rest of the week. When the bolt came off the second door, the door opened by itself, about a hand's width, the way a door does when the frame has settled. There was a woman in that room in a wheelchair. She had her hair combed. That is the detail that stayed with me. Somebody had combed it that morning, and she was sitting in a room 8 feet wide with a window well drywalled over, and she looked up at a strange man in her doorway with a drill in his hand and was not afraid of me. She said, "Are you the one who brings the trays?" I told her, "No, ma'am." I told her I was the man who built the house. She said the ceiling was low. I said yes, it was, and that I was the one who put it there, and that I was sorry about it now. Behind the third door, a radio was playing low. A man's voice said goodnight to me through the wood and did not open it, and his name was on the frame in pencil, in somebody's handwriting. Marvin. I had my hand on the fourth door when headlights came across the window well and stopped. I stood in the dark with a drill in my hand until a door slammed overhead, and then I went out through the walkout like a man leaving a house he does not own. That is what I had when I got to the truck, not a plan. 14 screws and a folded work order. 3 days later, the electrician did the only thing a licensed man can do with a report like that. He filed it. A red tag goes to the county. The county mails its notice about unpermitted work to the address on the tax roll, and a carrier re-inspects any address that turns up on a county notice. Nobody had to tell anybody one word about my son. Dale called me at 10 o'clock that night. "What did you do?" "I didn't do anything," I said. "I didn't sign." He hung up on me. I poured 14 screws out on my kitchen table and looked at them for a long time, and then I put them back in my pocket, and that is where they stayed. I have 2 rooms over my old shop on Cass Street. I have lived there since June of 2020, when Dale's framing outfit went under, and my son sat in my kitchen with his hands between his knees and asked me where they were supposed to go. I told him what any man tells his kid. Go home. There was never a lease. There was never any rent. Not a dollar. Not 1 month. Not once in 6 years. I built that house in 1983 with a crew of 4 and a borrowed compressor. Bernie Tulloch set the ridge for me on a Saturday for nothing but lunch, because Bernie taught me the trade in 1979 and never learned how to charge his own apprentice. He kept everything in a carpenter's pocketbook, and he made me buy one my first week. I still have one in my shirt. The rest are in a milk crate over the shop. I put windows in that basement. Well, windows cut through 10 inches of block in every room down there because of my mother. In 1979, my mother had a stroke on a Thursday, and by the next Wednesday, she was in a private rest home out on the county line. My uncle by marriage signed the papers. He had power of attorney and a fountain pen, and I was 19, and my signature was not worth anything to anybody. I found her in a room with the window painted shut. She said, "Nobody comes down here, Teddy." Those are the last words of hers I have. I was not a son to her that year. I was a chapter that somebody had already closed and set aside, and everybody in that hallway treated me accordingly. So when I built my own house, I built my promise into it out of lumber, because lumber was what I had. Every room below grade got daylight. And in 43 years, I never once hung a door in that house with a lock on the outside of it. Nell knew all of that. She was there for the digging. When the stairs got to be too much for her in the fall of 2018, I widened that jamb myself so the chair would clear, and she watched me do it from the hall with a cup of tea going cold in her hands. She made me promise the room would stay hers. And she made me promise one more thing, and made me say it out loud. Because she knew me. Never be the one who locks the door on that boy. Dale was 34 then, and already the kind of man who tells you a thing has been decided. That night, I opened my pocketbook, and I wrote down what I had seen the way you write down a job. Date, time, room dimensions, condition of the doors. Then I sat there, with the pen in my hand. For 6 years I had signed whatever anybody put in front of me, because signing was the cheapest way I knew to stay in my son's life. I signed one more thing that summer. He was not in the room when I did it. In the morning, I called a number out of the county directory, and a woman at Adult Protective Services took the address and my name and asked what my relationship to the property was. I told her. She said someone would follow up, and she told me the truth, which is that it takes time. That was the last call I made about any of it. Everything after that, other people did, out of paperwork that already existed. On Sunday, I went to dinner. I want you to understand why. Junie is 8. She sets a place for me on the end without being asked. If I stop coming, the only version of me she gets is the one her mother describes on the telephone. Tammy had her mother on speaker in the kitchen while she made the gravy, and her mother asked how the old man was doing, and Tammy said, "He's fine. He wanders in, he wanders out. We just work around him." I was 6 feet away with a dish towel in my hands. At the table, Dale did his version. 2 roommates, a couple of young people, cash, helping with the taxes, and honestly, Dad, it takes some of the load off you. He talked about the load off me for a while. Verna came in halfway through with a folder under her arm, kissed the top of my head, and said we would look at some paperwork later. No rush. Nothing serious. My daughter Verna is 38 and she does discharge planning at Memorial. It is her job to decide 5 days a week where old people go when a hospital is finished with them. Junie brought me a drawing before dessert. Our house, in crayon, with the maple I planted the year Dale was born and a sun in the corner with eyelashes on it. Down at the bottom she had drawn the basement, the way kids do, like a cutaway of a doll's house. 4 rooms, 4 doors. On 3 of them she had drawn a little rectangle on the outside of the frame, because that is what was there, and she was 8, and she drew what she saw. I told her it was a good drawing and that she got the maple right. Then I folded it and put it in my shirt pocket behind the work order, and I asked Dale, at his mother's table, to see the lease. He said there wasn't one. He said it was informal. I said that everything is informal until somebody gets hurt in it. The call that mattered came on the 2nd of July, and it was not the county. It was a licensing consultant at the State Bureau working an application, calling to verify who owned the property. She was kind and careful, and she asked me to confirm the spelling of my last name twice. Then she said, "Mr. Myers, the application in front of me already has your authorization on it." I said I would like to see that. She said she could not read it to me over the telephone, and that I would have to put the request in writing to the Bureau in Lansing like anybody else. 5 business days to answer, then a letter telling you what the copies cost, then a check, then the mail. She said figure a month, start to finish. I thanked her and I hung up and I stood in my kitchen with my hand still on the phone. Somebody had signed my name. I did not know that for certain yet. What I knew was that a state office had a piece of paper with my authorization on it, that nobody had ever put a pen in my hand and asked for it, and that a man who has signed 40 years of contracts knows the difference between signing a thing and being told he did. I filled out the request that night in block letters and mailed it Friday morning. Then I did the hardest thing I have done in my life, which was nothing for 3 weeks, in front of them. Kaylee is the girl with the laundry basket. Kaylee Prill, 24, second shift at the seat plant out on M52. I met her properly at the curb on a Wednesday when she was waiting for her ride. $650 a month cash in an envelope, no lease and no receipt. She asked me, polite as anything, whether the new owner was going to raise it. I told her there was no new owner. She said, "Huh, Then she said the thing I had been circling for a week and a half without knowing how to ask. The other three don't really come out. There's a lady comes Tuesdays with a grocery bag full of those pill sorters. The 1 and 2 calls me the tray girl. I keep telling her I'm not staff. Her ride came. She got in. I stood at the end of my own driveway. I called my youngest that night. Arlen is 35 and he runs maintenance at Bramble Ridge, which is a licensed care center in Corunna with 140 beds, and he has been changing filters and fixing call lights in that building for 9 years. I told him what I had seen. 4 doors, 3 bolts, a woman in a chair, a lady with pill sorters on Tuesdays, $650 cash from the one who was actually a tenant. He was quiet long enough that I checked the phone. Then he said, "Dad, that's not roommates. That's an adult foster care home, and if there's no license on that address, every part of it is illegal." He walked me through it the way he would walk a new hire through a fire panel. What a representative payee is, how a man gets himself appointed to receive another man's benefits, and what he has to file every year about how he spent them. Then he said, 3 residents, downstate rates. That's north of $9,000 a month. I asked him how he knew the rate. He said, "Because I make $18 an hour in a building that does it legally." Then he said the other thing. He said, "Dad, I haven't been in that house since last August. Dale told me you didn't want me around while you were grieving." I had not said that. I had never said that to anybody about any of my children. There is a particular quiet that gets into a man when he finds out what has been said in his name. The bolts went back on the next morning. Then on the 5th of July, somebody came back with longer screws, 2.5 inch, driven into the studs instead of the jamb, so that a man with a drill would take some of the door frame with him if he tried it again. I stood in that hallway and looked at them and did not touch them. On the 12th, Verna came to the shop with her folder, and Dale came with her, and Tammy stood in my doorway holding her phone up at chest height the whole time, the way you hold a phone when you want a thing on the record and you do not want to say so. Durable power of attorney, patient advocate designation, 2 signature lines flagged with little colored tabs. Dale said, "It's for the insurance, Dad, so we can handle things when you're not up to it." I said that was a considerate thing for a son to think of, and I asked him which insurance, because I have 3 kinds, and they do not talk to each other. He said he would have to check. I asked Verna what happens, in her actual professional experience, to a person's file after those 2 pages are signed. She looked at the tabs and not at me. I said I would like a glass of water. Tammy got it. It gave everybody something to do. Then I put the cap back on the pen and put the pen in my shirt pocket, next to a folded work order and a crayon drawing of my own house, and I told them I would look at it that evening. Dale said, "You said that about the work order." I said, "I did. I did not intend it as a joke." The water heater finally got somebody on the 14th. I drove over to let the plumber in, because it was easier than explaining to my son why I still carry a key to a house I only sleep away from. While the plumber was on his knees at the tank, I stood at the bottom of the stairs. The 4th door was open a hand's width. I put 1 finger on it, and it went the rest of the way, and there was an old man in there measuring the wall. He had a folding rule, not a tape, a wooden folding rule, the kind that has not been in a hardware store since I was young, and he was walking it up the block wall in 6-inch bites the way you do when you are checking somebody else's work. Then he sat on the edge of the bed and wrote the number down in a carpenter's pocketbook. He heard me and looked up, and he was very polite about it. "Are you here about the framing?" I said, "No, sir." I said I was just seeing about the hot water. He said the ceiling in here was low and that whoever put the wall in had run it across the well, which is a shame because there was a window there once. He said you could see the old lintel if you knew what you were looking at. He was right. He had been right about a wall since before I was old enough to buy a beer. His hands had gotten small. That is what happens. But he still had a carpenter's pencil behind his ear, flat side up, and when he closed that folding rule, he snapped it into itself with his thumb in 3 moves. And there is exactly 1 man alive who ever showed me how to do that. The pocketbook on his knee had a cover gone soft as cloth, and on it, in ballpoint, gone over more than once. B. Tulloch. I sat down on the bottom stair. I'm not sure I decided to. I asked him who he was waiting on. He said, "The fellow who owns the place. They tell me he comes by." He said it the way you say a thing you have said many times, without any weight on it at all. Then Dale was on the stairs behind me, saying my name in the voice you use in a hospital corridor. He said, "Dad, come up." He gets confused. I went up. I want that on the record, because I have gone over it since. I went up the stairs, and I let my son close a door on Bernard Tulloch, and I drove home, and I sat in the truck outside my shop until the streetlight came on. 4 days later, I could not get into my house. I drove over on Saturday morning to bring Junie her bike. I put my key in the front door and it went in 2/3 of the way and stopped. 14 keys on that ring. Some of them older than my son. I stood on my own porch and tried 4 of them, which is 3 more than a sensible man tries. There was a dumpster in the driveway with a stud wall in it, broken up and pink insulation blowing around the yard. They had emptied the first room. Kaylee had been moved upstairs, which I found out later was because a room with no window is a problem for a licensing inspector, and a young woman who talks to strangers at the curb is a bigger one. Nell's things were in the bed of Dale's truck. 4 boxes. It had rained since 2 o'clock in the morning. I know what was in them because I packed them in 2019. Her mother's dishes, her patterns, the good tablecloth she used twice a year, a shoebox of Dale's report cards that she kept because she was the kind of woman who keeps report cards. The cardboard had gone dark and soft at the bottoms, and one of them had already given out at the corner. I carried them to my truck one at a time. 4 trips in the rain, 66 years old, in front of my son's kitchen window, and nobody came out. Then I looked at the 4th door and it was open and the bed was stripped. Dale came out then, finally, wiping his hands on a towel. He said Bernie had gone to stay with a friend of his for a while. He said it was temporary. He said, "Dad, you're standing in the rain." My hand went. I let it. I stood there and let my hand shake in front of him, and I did not put it in my pocket, and he looked away first. Then I drove to Cass Street and put 4 wet boxes on my shop bench under the light, and on Monday morning I called a lawyer. Ellis Vandenberg did the closing on that house in 1983, and he is 71 now, and he only keeps the practice open 3 days a week. I sat in his office with a folded work order, a crayon drawing, and a request receipt from a state licensing bureau in Lansing. He listened for 40 minutes and did not write anything down, which I have since learned is what a lawyer does while he decides whether the man across the desk is telling the truth. Then he asked me one question. He asked whether anybody had ever suggested to me that I was not managing my own affairs. I told him about the phone at chest height and the 2 colored tabs, and my son telling a licensed electrician that I forget what I sign. He picked up his own phone. On the 24th of July, a geriatrician in Flint spent 2 hours and 10 minutes with me. Full capacity evaluation, written report, the kind they use in probate court. I did the clock. I did the words. I told a stranger my mother's maiden name and what I would do if I smelled smoke in a building. On the 27th, I signed a new will in Vandenberg's conference room in front of a video camera on a tripod, with 2 witnesses who stood to gain nothing from any of it, and a notary who wrote it all into her journal in her own hand. I signed 4 other documents that morning. I am not going to tell you yet what they were. Then I drove to my credit union, and I sat down with a young man in a tie, and I canceled one standing transfer that had gone out on the 1st of every month since August of 2020. 72 months, $2,100 a month. I did not send a letter. I did not make an announcement. I went home, and I ate a sandwich standing at the counter. On the 30th of July, a caseworker from the state sat in my son's kitchen for 50 minutes. I was not there. I heard about it the way I heard about most things that summer, which is that Dale called me at 11 at night to find out what I had done. He did not ask whether I had called anybody. He asked me who had been in his house. I told him the truth, which is that I did not know, and that anybody who wants to know who complained about a thing should start by looking at the thing. The next morning, the envelope from Lansing came to my shop. It was thin. I had been expecting a brick of paper, and it was 6 pages. The third page was a form called an owner authorization, dated the 9th of March, giving Quarry Road Residential LLC permission to operate an adult foster care home at 4410 Quarry Road, and at the bottom of it was my name, Theodore R. Myers. The R is my mother's people. Whoever wrote it got the R right. They got the T wrong. I crossed my T from the bottom up because I learned to write on a job site with my hand cold, and it comes out looking like a nail bent over. Every contract I ever signed has that bent nail in it. I sat down on the shop stool and I put both hands flat on the bench. At 19 years old, my name on a piece of paper was worth nothing to anybody, and my mother died in a room with the window painted shut, and there was not one thing about me that anybody in that building needed. And now, at 66, my name was the most valuable thing in that whole house, and my son sat down at a table and wrote it himself, because writing it himself was easier than asking me a question and waiting for the answer. That is the part I want you to hear. If your children have started saying "we" about your life, they are not always trying to hurt you. Sometimes they have decided your part is over, and all that is left of you is a line at the bottom of a page, and they can do that part themselves. I put the 6 pages in a folder. I did not call anybody, and I did not drive anywhere. I went to work on a stair rail I had promised a woman on Bennett Street in June. The 1st of August was a Saturday. $2,100 did not arrive in my son's account. It did not arrive on the 2nd either. On the 2nd of August, I went to Sunday dinner and told my daughter-in-law the roast was good, and it was. Dale was in a mood I had not seen since he was in his 20s. He had his phone out at the table, showing his sister a photograph of a room, telling her the expansion could be done before the leaves turned, that this was the year everything finally came around for them. Verna asked him where the money for that was coming from. He said, "It's handled." I said, "Well, let me take a look at it sometime." Then I asked Junie about her swim lessons, and she told me about the deep end for 10 minutes, and I listened to every word of it. Nobody at that table knew that 6 days earlier a young man in a tie had asked me if I was sure, and that I had said yes. By the 4th, the skid steer payment had bounced, and the truck payment had bounced, and the tuition portal at Junie's school had sent Tammy the email that schools send. Dale called me at 4 in the afternoon, and he was pleasant. He said, "Hey, Dad, quick thing. I think the bank fouled something up on the automatic." I said, "There might be a problem with it." He said he would look into it in the morning. He was already talking about something else. That is the thing about a man handed a check every month for 6 years. He does not hear the check stop. He hears a delay. He called again at 9:40, and he was not pleasant, and I let him say all of it. And I said good night to my son and put the phone face down on the bench. On the 6th of August, my son and my daughter filed a petition in the probate court of Shiawassee County asking to be appointed guardian and conservator of my person and my estate. The 6th of August was the date printed on their licensing file. He spent it at the courthouse, filing paper about me. Vandenberg's office got the notice before I did. He called me and told me to sit down, and I said I was already sitting, which was a lie, and then I sat down. The petition said that I am 66 and live alone, that I have had episodes of confusion, that I have signed documents and then denied signing them, that I had been telephoning agencies about the family home and making allegations, and that the petitioners were acting out of concern for my welfare and for the preservation of the estate. That is the sentence I keep. For the preservation of the estate. Attached to it were 19 pages of exhibits. 18 of them had my signature at the bottom, and not one of those was mine. Leases, intake agreements, a room and care fee schedule, an owner authorization. The 19th page had somebody else's name at the bottom of it. A page authorizing the LLC to receive and manage the funds of a resident named Bernard M. Tulloch. They filed all of it themselves. They walked it into the courthouse and paid the fee and handed the clerk a stack of paper to prove that I was a man who does not know what he signs. Vandenberg read it twice. Then he took his glasses off and set them on the desk very gently. the way a man does when he is being careful with his own hands. He said, "Theodore, they just filed our evidence for us." I asked him what we do now. He said we do nothing. He said we answer the petition. We appear on the 18th. And in the meantime, we do not send a single letter. We do not warn anybody, and we do not correct one word of anything they say about me. I said that I had already been doing that for 6 weeks. He said, "Good. Do it for 12 more days." I went to work. I ate at the counter. I put a crayon drawing of my own house up over the shop bench with a pushpin, and every morning I looked at it, at the 4 little rectangles a child drew on the outside of 3 doors, and then I picked up my chisel. And down on Quarry Road, my son had never felt better in his life. That is the part nobody warns you about. He had gotten the bank to give him 30 days on the truck. He had a court date that his lawyer told him was practically a formality. He had told his wife it was all handled, and he had 4 rooms and only 3 of them earning. On the 8th of August, a woman named Darlene Pisek drove up from Durand with her father in the passenger seat and $19,000 in a cashier's envelope. She told me the rest of it herself later, standing in my driveway. 6 months up front and a holding fee. Her father is 84 and had gotten where he could not be left alone in the afternoons, and she had been calling licensed places for 5 weeks and getting waiting lists. Dale showed her the second room and told her the current resident was transitioning out at the end of the month. He had a bigger room standing empty at the bottom of those stairs, the one with the wall taken back out of it. He did not show her that one. He was saving it. The current resident was Odessa Feeney, 79 years old, who had been in that room since February, whose hair somebody combed every morning, and who had not been told anything at all. She had signed for $41,000 of cabinets. $12,000 of that envelope went down on them the following Tuesday. Tammy picked shaker style in a color called driftwood in a showroom in Flint for a house that was not hers in the middle of the worst week of her husband's life, and she did not know yet that it was. On the 10th, my son borrowed $85,000, not from a bank. Banks look at things. He borrowed it from an outfit in Southfield that does short money for people in a hurry, and he pledged the rents as collateral and handed over copies of 4 leases to prove the rents existed. 4 leases, signed by the owner of the property. Craig Hoyt signed the personal guarantee. Craig is Verna's husband, and he sells farm equipment, and he has never in his life read a document all the way to the end. They had put a man in the 4th room 3 days before that, on the 7th. The room Bernie had been taken out of. His name is Alton Deeds, and he is 88, and he came out of Memorial on a Friday afternoon, which is when hospitals do their hardest discharges, and the discharge planner who found the placement was my daughter. My daughter put an 88-year-old man in a basement she had stood in. I found all of this out later, in order, from documents. I want to be clear about that, because I know how a story like this is supposed to go. The old man is supposed to be out there in a parked car with binoculars. I was building a stair rail on Bennett Street. Everything that happened next happened because of paper that already existed, and because of people whose job it is to look at paper. On the 12th of August, a licensing consultant from the State Bureau, a woman named Renata Adair, came out to 4410 Quarry Road at 9 in the morning with a clipboard and a state identification badge on an unannounced visit, which is how those visits are done. Here is what she found in the first 10 minutes. A service panel with a red tag on it, 4 sleeping rooms below grade, and not one of them with a window or a second way out. 3 doors with barrel bolts on the outside, reinstalled with 2.5-inch screws driven into the studs. 3 residents, all of them over 75, and a 4th intake agreement in the binder for a man who was not in the building. No license, no permit on file with the county. A payee arrangement on 1 resident, and 2 other people's debit cards in a kitchen drawer, and a licensing file that already contained one thing my son did not know about, which was a written request from the property owner, dated the 2nd of July, asking for a copy of the owner authorization on file. Adair asked him one question at the top of those stairs. Kaylee heard it through the floor and told me later. She said, "Mr. Myers, who signed this?" That is all it ever was. Not a speech, not a courtroom, not a father getting even. One woman with a clipboard in a hallway, asking a question that only had one answer on a Wednesday morning. By the 14th, it was finished, and none of it was done by me. The operation was ordered closed, and Adult Protective Services substantiated. Marvin and Alton Deeds went to Bramble Ridge, where my youngest son changes the filters. Odessa Feeney went to a licensed home in Owasso with a garden, and her daughter in Arizona was found in 4 hours by people who do that for a living. The payee account was frozen. The debit cards went into an evidence bag. The insurance cancellation took effect on the 13th. The lender in Southfield read one paragraph of a state order and called the whole $85,000 due and turned to the personal guarantee. And Craig Hoyt found out at his kitchen table what he had signed in a restaurant parking lot. Verna told me that part herself, later, in my shop doorway. The county building department opened a file on unpermitted construction and mailed a notice to the property owner, which is to say to me, and the notice said the work could be legalized by permit application. I did not apply for a permit for those rooms. That is the only thing in this entire story that I actually did. Twice. Once with a work order in June, and once with a permit application in August. And then Darlene Pasek drove back up from Durand on Friday afternoon to move her father in, and there was a state order taped to the door, and 9 of us were standing in that driveway when she got out of her car with a laundry basket of her father's things. She asked Dale where her money was. He said there had been a misunderstanding with his father. She said, "Well, where is my money?" in the voice of a woman who works at a dental office and has 2 teenagers. She said it 4 times, and every neighbor on that side of Quarry Road heard all 4, and Tammy stood on the porch with her arms crossed. I did not say anything. I was there to pick up Junie for her swim lesson. They came to me that weekend. All of them. They came in order, which I think about sometimes. Tammy came first and cried in my shop doorway and told me she had never once said anything unkind about me. Verna came second with a folder, which is how my daughter comes, and inside it was a corrective owner authorization, drawn up by somebody, dated back to March. She said, "Dad, just sign this one properly. It fixes everything." I looked at it for a while. Then I asked her whose handwriting was on the first one. She left with the folder still open in her hands. Dale came last on Sunday evening and sat down on my shop stairs, and he did not sit on them the way the man of 41 sits. He sat the way he did at 9, with his back against the rail post. He said, "I'm your son. You can't do this to Blood." I sat there and let that be in the room for a while. Then I told him the truth, which was that I had not done anything to him. I had stopped doing things for him. He was welcome to check which one it was, and I told him the only place he was going to find the difference was in his own paperwork. He said, "You want me to lose everything?" I said no. I said that I had wanted for 6 years to be asked one question before things were decided, and I would still take it if there was one left in him. He did not have one. He asked me for $9,000. On Monday, I called an audiology clinic in Flint and paid $4,600 against an account in the name of Wesley Hoyt, who is my grandson, and who had been waiting since February for 2 hearing aids because his parents' insurance covers half and his parents do not have the other half. I asked the clinic not to say who paid it. They told her anyway. She came to the shop on Tuesday with her face all wrung out. I said 2 sentences to her on that porch, and I have not taken either one back. I said, "That was for the boy, not for you." And I said, "Don't come back with a second one." On the 17th, Vandenberg called me with an idea, and it was a good lawyer's idea, and it was the only time all summer I raised my voice. He said the granddaughter had lived in that house all year. He said an 8-year-old who could describe the hardware on those doors, in her own words, would be worth more than any exhibit we had. He was not wrong. She drew it in crayon in June. That drawing was pinned over my bench 4 feet from where I was standing when he said it. I told him no. I told him she is 8 years old and that she is my granddaughter and not my witness, and that if I win this thing by putting a child in a room to talk about her father, then I have not won anything. I have only gotten to be the kind of man who does that. He said I had to offer it. I said I knew he did. Then he told me they had found Bernie, not me. The state's people, working through the LLC's own bank statements, because $60 a day had been going out to a woman in Perry since the 18th of July, and it does not take long to find out what $60 a day is buying. A motel room on M52 with a caretaker who checked on him twice. He had been in that motel for a month. He had a duffel bag and a folding rule and a pocketbook, and when they asked him his name, he gave it to them, and when they asked him who to call, he told them there wasn't anybody. The hearing was on the 18th of August at 9 in the morning, in a courtroom on the second floor with a radiator that knocks even in August. Their lawyer went first. He was young, and he did it properly. Episodes of confusion. Documents signed and denied. An elderly gentleman living alone above a commercial building, isolated, widowed, telephoning county agencies. Then Vandenberg stood up and did 4 things, and none of them took long. He filed a capacity evaluation, 22 pages, performed on the 24th of July by a geriatrician who does these for the court, concluding that I have no cognitive impairment of any kind. He filed the report of the guardian ad litem, a lawyer the court had sent out to my shop on the 11th, who wrote that the respondent gave a full account of his assets, his medications, and every document in his possession. He put in the notary's journal from the 27th of July, in her handwriting and the video of that signing, and he offered to play it, and the judge said she did not need to see it. Then he picked up the petitioner's own exhibits, 19 pages. He asked the court to note that the respondent had, on the 2nd of July, requested a copy of Exhibit 3 from the State Licensing Bureau in writing over his own signature, that the Bureau's certified copy was in front of the court, and that the state police had a document examiner who would say in one word whether the same hand made both. Judge Prentice denied the petition from the bench in about 90 seconds. Then she did the thing their lawyer had not prepared for. She kept the exhibits, and she referred the file to the prosecuting attorney, and she said out loud that the court had significant concerns regarding Exhibit 11. Exhibit 11 was the representative payee application for a resident named Bernard M. Tulloch. That is when the room stopped being about me. The state's file was already in front of the court, and their lawyer had put it there, and the caseworker's summary got read into the record while my son sat at the petitioner's table with his hands in his lap. Bernard Tulloch, 84. Widower. His son sold the house in Perry in November and took a job in Texas. On the 14th of December, Bernie walked 3/4 of a mile in his good coat and knocked on the door of 4410 Quarry Road because it was the only address left in his head that had ever been glad to see him, and he asked for Teddy. My son told him that Teddy Myers had passed 2 years ago. Then he gave him the 4th room and applied to become the payee for $2,380 a month and did not mention any of it to me across 8 months of Sunday dinners. His pocketbook was in evidence. That is how they were able to say what day he was told. The caseworker had gone through it page by page, because a man who wrote down the weather for 60 years does not stop. 41 pages of that basement room. The width, the ceiling height, the depth of the well behind the drywall. Over and over, 3 and 4 times a week, the way you remeasure a job when the numbers cannot possibly be right. And in the top corner of every page, until the 14th of December, the same 4 words in a carpenter's block letters. Ask Teddy about window. After the 14th of December, no more words, just numbers. The last page stops in the middle of 1, 7 feet 2, and he never got to the half. I did not make a sound in that courtroom. I want to be honest with you about why. It was not strength. It was that my mother said nobody comes down here, Teddy. And I had spent 40 years and more putting windows into basements so that nobody would ever have to say it again. And a man cannot make a sound with that in his chest. Dale did not look at me. He looked at the radiator. When it was over, Judge Prentice asked me to remain, and she asked me a question, and I have turned it over a great deal since," she said. "Mr. Myers, this court has been told a great deal about what should happen to your property. Nobody has asked you, what do you want done with that house?" And then she waited. She put her pen down and she waited, and the room waited with her. And it had been 7 years since anybody let a question of mine take as long as it needed. I told her. It took me about 1.5 minutes, and I did not rush any of it. On the 20th, they let me into my own house. The stud wall was already out of the first room. I did the rest myself, with a cat's paw and a hammer, and it took me 2 days. Because a 66-year-old man takes 2 days. I pulled 3 hollow core doors off their hinges and stood them in the driveway. I backed the 2.5-inch screws out of the studs and let the bolts fall in a coffee can. Then I cut the drywall off the window well in the first room and let the daylight back into it, and I sat on the floor in there for a while with the dust going around in the light. Bernie came on the 21st with a caseworker to collect his duffel bag. He stood at the bottom of the stairs in his good coat and looked at the open window and did not say anything about it for a long time. Then he said, "You the fellow that owns the place?" I said I was. He said, "They told me you'd come by." The county had a bed for him. The caseworker had the paperwork with her, and it was the best place in the county, a private room and a garden and people who know what they are doing, and she went through all of it with him the way you should. He listened all the way to the end. He is polite. He was always polite. Then he shook his head, and he pointed down the hall at the first room, and he said, "I know that room. There's a window behind that wall." I told him there was, and that it was open now. He asked whether the door had a lock on it. I said it would by Saturday, and that the key would be his. I took the ring out of my pocket. 14 keys. I worked the basement key off the split ring with my thumbnail, which took longer than it should have, and I put it on the little leather tag my wife stamped at a county fair in 1994. 4 letters, TEDD. She ran out of room on the tag, and she never once let me forget it. I put it in his hand. He turned it over. He read the tag. He rubbed his thumb across it twice. Then he said, "Teddy?" I said, "Yes, Bernie." I said, "It is me." I said, "I am sorry it took so long." He put the key in his shirt pocket, and he patted the pocket flat, the way he always did with a pencil, and he said, "Well, all right then. That is all either of us said about it. We have not said any more about it since." I hung his door on Saturday the 22nd. I built it in the shop out of solid stock, because I had the stock, and because I did not want anything hollow in that hallway ever again. 3 hinges mortised. A privacy set with the thumb turn on the inside, where it belongs. 3 hinges. I put the 14 in first, 2 in every leaf, and 2 into the strike, screws I had carried in my trouser pocket since the 23rd of June. And then I drove the new ones in around them. The permit came through in September. 1 room, 1 window, 1 door. I drew the well on the application myself, and the county inspector signed it off on the 2nd, and it is the only piece of paper about that house I have ever been glad to put my name on. Vandenberg drew up a lease, 1 page, and Bernie read all of it twice, and made me change the date on the second line because I had put the wrong Saturday. $400 a month out of his own money, restored to his own account. He insisted on it, and I let him, because taking a man's rent is a way of telling him he is not a charity case. His caseworker read it before he signed it and wrote down that she had. He wrote the amount in his pocketbook. First entry in 8 months that was not the width of a wall. That afternoon, Arlen came over to help me carry the last of the doors out to the truck, and when we were done, he sat down on the basement stairs, 3 steps up, and did not get back off them. He said, "Dad?" I said, "What?" He said, "What do you want?" I told him I was fine. He said, "That's not what I asked." And then he said, "I've got nowhere to be. I'm going to sit here until you're done talking." And he sat there. I am 66 years old. I have been asked how I am doing perhaps 4,000 times since my wife died, and I have answered it the same way 4,000 times, and the answer takes about 1.5 seconds, and everybody's shoulders come down and we all go get a plate. Nobody had made me finish before. It took me a while to start. I told him I want to eat at a table where somebody asks me a question about the day I had and then waits through the whole answer. I told him I want to be the one who decides who sleeps in the rooms of the house I built for as long as I am able, and I want somebody to tell me straight when I am not able, instead of writing my name themselves. I told him I want to die in a room with a window in it. He did not fix any of it. He did not say a word about it, actually. He sat on the stairs with his forearms on his knees and let me finish, and then he said, "Okay?" And then he said, "You want a hand with the trim in there?" That is the whole thing. That is the entire thing I had been waiting 6 years for, and it cost him 40 minutes on a Saturday. I told you I signed 4 other documents in that conference room on the 27th of July, and that I would tell you later. A revocation of every power of attorney I ever put my name on. A patient advocate designation naming Arlen, who did not find out about it until October. A deed with a life estate kept back for me, so the house belongs to somebody else the day after I am finished with it, and not 1 hour sooner. And a sealed letter. For whoever is standing there on the day, I cannot answer a question for myself. All 4 of them say the same thing in different words. Ask me first. 5 months later, this is where everybody is. Dale pled in December. Embezzlement from a vulnerable adult. Forgery. And uttering and publishing, which is the old Michigan name for the second half of it, because writing another man's name is one crime, and handing that paper across a counter is a second one. Sentencing is in March. The presentence report has the number he owes Darlene Pisek and the number he owes the Social Security Administration for 7 months of another man's benefits. He will be paying on both of them into his 50s. He rents a room by the week over a bar in Corona. He is out on bond with conditions, and before he can move out of that room, he has to submit the new address and wait for it to come back approved. My son spent 8 months deciding where old men would sleep. Now a stranger with a checklist decides where he sleeps. Nobody arranged that. It is only what the paperwork does. Tammy's kitchen went in. Shaker style, driftwood, cabinets bolted to the walls of a house with one name on the deed, and a cabinet screwed to a wall belongs to the wall. Her purchases are in the presentence report, item by item, with the dates and the amounts. And in March, about 30 people are going to hear that list read out loud. She took Junie to her mother's in Flushing in October. Verna was charged along with her brother. The day the paperwork was filed, Memorial put her on unpaid leave, and in November, it became something other than leave. A conviction on that charge goes into the background check system every licensed facility in Michigan is required to run before it hires anybody. She spent 14 years deciding which building an old person would be sent to. She is not going to be allowed to work in one of those buildings again. The note she wrote about her father's confusion, dated the 12th of July, is Exhibit 7 in the prosecutor's file. Craig Hoyt has a judgment against him for the $85,000 and the costs, and a garnishment on his wages, and the boat went in September. Wesley has his hearing aids. He got them the first week of school. That was the last money of mine that any of them will ever get. And every one of them knows it. And not one of them has asked. Kaylee Prill has a lease with a date on it and a signature on it that is actually mine, and a receipt book, and she finished her certificate in November and works days now. Odessa Feeney is in the licensed home with the garden. Her daughter flew in from Arizona in September, and Mrs. Feeney tells her every visit that the man who built the house came down one night with a drill and took the lock off her door. I do not correct her. I moved back into my own house in October. I sleep upstairs in the room I framed in 1983. Bernie has the first room down at the bottom of the stairs, the one with the window well, and the key is in his shirt pocket. And some mornings he calls me Teddy, and some mornings he calls me the fella that owns the place, and I answer to both of them. He measures jobs for me. He gets the numbers wrong about a third of the time now, and I write them in my own book anyway, next to the right ones, and neither of us makes anything of it. Junie comes every other Saturday. She has asked exactly once what happened to the basement, and I told her we fixed the windows. She has never heard the word bolt from me, and she is not going to. Arlen took the 2 rooms over the shop. The maple I planted the year Dale was born is 42 feet now. In January, there is frost on the inside sill of that basement window, and at about 4 in the afternoon, the light comes across the floor of Bernie's room and gets as far as the doorway. I sit on the top step sometimes and watch it do that, and I do not feel like a man who won anything. I feel like a man who is still here, and who is still being asked, "I want to say one thing to you before I go, and then I will let you get on with your evening." If your parents are still around, and you have gotten in the habit of deciding things and then telling them afterward, I am not going to lecture you. You are tired and there is a lot on you. I only want you to notice the difference between telling and asking. From where your father is sitting, it is the whole difference. And if you are my age, and your children have started using the word we about your life, and there is a piece of paper somewhere with your name on it that you do not remember signing, go find out. Today. It is not rude. It is your name. So tell me in the comments, when was the last time somebody asked you what you wanted and then waited for the whole answer? I would like to know. I read them. Thank you for sitting with me this long. My name is Theodore Myers. I'm 66 years old and I still have all 14 keys. Well, 13.